Welcome to another episode of Come Together. Another episode of Come Together. I'm sorry that this was a slow episode, but hard work hopefully will be prevailing and paying off shortly. I have a lot in the in the oven right now coming up for the future, the next couple of weeks. I'm very excited. Some musical people, some medical professionals, some educators, um, some professors, and maybe a couple other public um, what's the word for it? Public facing, public not public servants, but people that take care of the public. And I got a lot coming on, a lot going on, and I'm very excited about all of it. Got some more friends coming on soon, and some new friends, some old friends. And rest assured, even though this week was a little slow, it's only because there's a lot cooking in the background, and I'm very excited about what is coming up. So it is Thursday, whew, end of almost a very long week. I have gone this week just has been one, I wouldn't want to say catastrophe because nothing bad actually happened, but it's required an enormous amount of me. I didn't really consume any cannabis this week, which was a very refreshing change of pace. And also it really it's been a little while since I took a break from it. And I it's crazy what the difference is. I find myself obviously a lot more energized for better or for worse, and I have a lot more stamina for better or for worse. The good stuff about that, that it gives me a lot more energy and a lot more drive to do more on a regular basis, be more active, and stay up later at night to do more podcast work, to do more reading and studying and learning and exercising and helping around the house and cleaning and cooking. And I really feel I feel like my productivity level has gone up pretty high. On the other hand, I'm having a harder time actually just sleeping and relaxing and being in the moment. And it feels very much as though um, which I don't even think it's a bad thing. I think it really depends. It's all about context, and it's all about the point in my life, what I'm trying to accomplish and when. And right now, this is a time for building. This is not a time for relaxing until I need to take a break and recharge my batteries. And so I feel like after this week, or maybe even next week, my batteries will be refreshed, recharged, and everything will be okay. So yesterday, I had a very bizarre experience, a rather bizarre experience. I first of all, I started teaching a third class because another English teacher had left the school. I'm not quite sure what the terms were, but he left, and the school needed someone to pick up pretty quickly. And I happened to have one free period in between the two classes that I taught, and I finally get to teach high school seniors, which has been a lot of fun. It's also really cool because the senior class was the first class that I taught um, 2, 3 years ago, and it was and it's cool to see really, where they are now and how much has changed, how much they've matured, and how much the perspective has changed from 10th grade to 12th grade. I I guess it's because of this I guess because I'm teaching these students at this point, at this conjunction in their life, at this point in their lives, it kind of is giving me a little bit of flashback experiences to when I was in 12th grade and trying to figure things out. And and I know that. in the school that I'm teaching, which is Orthodox Jewish school, pretty right-leaning as far as religious level goes. Um, I'm aware that a lot of these guys are going to be, and this is actually a pretty big Jewish problem in the Jewish world in general. From my understanding, uh, you have you're not sure if you're Orthodox Jew how much to get involved in the secular world or not, to what degree. Because on one hand, you want to, and on one hand, it's exciting. On one hand, it's enticing. On the other hand, a lot of times modern day Western philosophy, postmodern or left-leaning philosophies tend to be, or further left-leaning philosophies tend to be a little contradictory or conflicting with Orthodox Jewish values. And the extent that that these students might be engaged, a lot of them are confused as to what their expectations are, where they're supposed to be headed, and what they're really supposed to do with themselves, and where they're supposed to go from here after 12th grade. Are you supposed to be professional? Are you supposed to go back to school? Are you supposed to continue dedicating your life to learning Judaism, um, which is a very popular route that many people go on. If you listen to my episode with Shua Edelstein from maybe a week or so ago, you would you can hear from his very own perspective what it was like, kind of balancing going to college, going to med school, and remaining an Orthodox Jew through the whole time, and and sticking to his values and what that experience was like. And a lot of them have a hard time, and I don't blame them. A lot of them have a hard time. They don't really know what they want, and also a lot of them don't even know what they want for themselves. Are they creative? Are they business oriented? Are they more inclined towards a more rigorous education? Um, maybe academia or something like that. And they don't really quite know where to go. And especially because, and this is something that it's not just for Jewish 12th graders, but for every 12th grader out there for all time. And that's why we have coming of age stories. And that's why we have, dramas. And that's why we have all these literary themes of growing into ourselves and figuring ourselves out and the journey to oneself. Um, I decided to, so I decided to show the class a little bit of Springsteen's Broadway show. Springsteen on Broadway is a 2 hour show, 2.5 hour show, um, that Springsteen put on for a couple of years. And it was a variation of his book, Born to Run, kind of in person, come to life. And he had a selection of his songbook, and he would describe what the songs were about, why he wrote them, what his headspace was like while he was writing them, who he's writing them for or about, and really provides a lot of context and details into his life. And one of the things that Springsteen, obviously, and I've talked about this a whole bunch, but he's a very emotional and very emotionally charged and aware individual, ups and downs and highs and lows, and feeling lost and feeling useless and feeling validated and feeling alive, and he's on fire and he's dead and he doesn't know what to do and he's crying and he's heartbroken, and the whole spectrum of human emotions just is just manifested in his concerts. And the same thing applies to the show, except it's a little bit more introspective. It's a little bit more of a tribute and a love letter to his old self and his old journey. And one of the things that he talks a lot about, especially in the song "Growing Up," which is one of my favorite songs by him, because the song is, as great as the song is. The song almost always in his live concerts, um, the song almost always is accompanied by an in-depth story that has partial truths, partial, exaggerations, like all good storytellers. But um, but he always talks about the feeling growing up, obviously, of discovering his place in the world as a musician, the conflicts between, his parents who want a better life for him and who want him to, they don't want him to, they've had their own struggles and to, they didn't want him to struggle the way that they did. And they didn't want him to suffer, to suffer the way that they did through trying to make their way through a very hard and painful world. And a realistic world, a world of reality where you work hard and you don't have time for your dreams. A world where if you take on responsibilities at the point when you're not really necessarily prepared for them emotionally, physically, whatever it is, that there might be more difficult and dire consequences than what you were expecting. And and that's really and and he would describe them. And one, and so growing up, one of the things that he talks about, and there's a version of the concert I'll post the link to both the Springsteen on Broadway version, but then there's also a version from the 80s, from his 84 tour, which was Born in the USA tour. And that's when his concerts were at their peak. He was selling out stadiums. He was just gigantic. And he actually like put on a full skit in the middle of the song. And he talks about the feeling of being in high school and feeling like he was lost and not having any friends and not having any love and not having any direction. And and that he acknowledged and that he had to work his way through it and he had to go through all this turbulence in order to get where he was. And I wanted to show this to the 12th graders, obviously, for it's almost needless to say, but this is something that you could admit. And then yesterday and after we watched that, we wrote for each wrote about points in their lives or in our lives where we really felt like we didn't fit in or we felt lost or confused. And we were talking about, and I said to them, I was like, listen, anyone that tells you they've got all their shit figured out is full of shit. Everyone that says that they always knew what they wanted and they always knew exactly what road to take and exactly which path to take and exactly what to do and when to do it is either lying or they didn't, and by the way, they might not even know that they're lying. I mean, if you're, I mean, I know many people, myself included, I'm sure, for extended periods of time where you don't know what you want, and so you ask, you ask and you ask questions and you see what other people want, and then you say, oh, maybe I want that, and you end up kind of taking on someone else's dreams and someone else's perspectives and someone else's ambitions, and 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 I actually wrote, and it really took me back. I wanted to write. So when I write with them and I talk to my students, I try very, very hard to be vulnerable and open and honest. And I think that's a really important thing to do as an educator. And I think it's a really effective way of building trust and building and showing that you're being authentic is by showing them, hey, I've been lost. I've been scared. I felt like my back was up against the wall and I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt the walls closing in around me and not know and I didn't know where to go. And if you are open about that, then it gives you a sense of authenticity and honesty and relatability that actually allows that allows the students to let you in and allows the students to learn from you and allows the students and you give them a license to be open. You give them a license to be honest and free. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. And obviously I also teach 10th grade otherwise. The other two classes are 10th graders, and they don't have the same level of maturity or the same kind of sense that this is where they are in their lives, so they don't feel quite the same way. But I didn't even know that. I guess I'm feeling old, and I guess this is a really crazy. I guess this is really one of the first indications of a cultural gap. I'm not surprised when my students don't know who Springsteen or Billy Joel is. I'm not surprised when my students don't know, anything about the 70s, about Vietnam, about, the Big Lebowski or 90s music, movies culture, um, Princess Bride, the Big Lebowski, even like the Disney classic, animated classic movies, which pretty took me pretty much by surprise, but they're like, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, are you talking about the live action Aladdin with Will Smith? And I'm like, oh my goodness, you couldn't just say that to me. Aladdin, Genie is not Will Smith. Genie is Robin Williams. Genie will always be Robin Williams. And, I'll take that to the grave. But And I bet that if they saw it, they would take it to the grave too. So now I have a responsibility to educate them the same way that I care to be that that I had to be educated. Excuse me. Um, about to just light up a cigar while I talk to you. So, um, my students had a vague idea who Steve Jobs was, and that was really a cultural shift. I like that showed me the cultural gap between the two of us. That like, Steve Jobs, and they're like, you guys know who he is, right? Like, oh, he did something to do with I think Apple, maybe, right? And I was like, you mean like founded it, started it? And so yesterday, I took it upon myself to introduce them. I couldn't believe that they never saw it. One student actually had seen it, but no one else had. And about his commencement graduation speech at Stanford University. And that speech was an incredible speech. And it's actually broken down into three categories. He did that, he said that intentionally. As he prepared the speech, he wanted to tell three different stories. The first one is about the notion and the idea that that in life, and as I was listening to this, even though I knew all these ideas, I found myself completely inspired and really really blown away by his but by the how articulate and how well he spoke and how grounded he seemed. He such a powerful personality, and of course he wasn't a perfect guy, far from it. But the first thing that he talked about was the notion that um, that in life, when you're young, and I could probably say I'm just out of this phase, although my foot, I probably still have a little portion of my foot still in the door. In life, you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect the dots going backwards. And there's going to be a lot going on, until you're a little bit more settled while you're trying to build yourself and while you're trying to figure things out. You're going to realize that you just don't know where things are going to end up. And the only thing, and you can't pretend to have everything figured out at a very young age because you don't know what's going to happen with your life. But the only thing that you could do is pursue the things that speak the most to you and try to chase them down the best way that you could. This doesn't necessarily mean to, and I think this is also important in its own right. It doesn't mean to avoid responsibility. And Steve, so the example that he gave, and I'm actually going to post a link also, I guess, to the commencement speech here in the show note captions so that you have so that you can check it out yourself. This is 1,000% worth the 10-15 minutes of your life to just even if you heard it before, to listen again. um I feel like we forgot about him. I feel like Steve Jobs is just forgotten about, and I don't know that we're better off for that. I really don't. But one of the thing so one of the examples that he gave was that when he went to college, he picked a very expensive private university, and it was very important to his parents that he went to college, and then he dropped out because he felt like he was wasting their money. He felt like it wasn't valuable. And what he said was, "But I didn't leave the campus. I I just dropped out, but I kept on dropping in to the classes that I was actually interested in. And even though I wasn't getting credits from them, I was learning, right? And I think that when people tell you not to, that school is not for everyone, and that you don't always have to do college, you don't have to always have to do a corporate job, they're not telling you to do nothing instead. They're telling you to, like, whatever efforts that you're going to put into, or at least there's the implication. This is what I understood from it, that you're. They're not telling you to not do anything. They're telling you that if a particular system doesn't work for you, don't force yourself to be a square in a circle or a circle in a square, but you got to put in the work. Like, it actually is probably a a call to more responsibility. It's probably a call to putting in more effort because you're going down a less traveled path, and you're going down and you're making your way through a system that has less rules and less structure, and so it requires more consciousness of you. It requires more intentionality. It requires more effort. There was my friend Ari and Yosef. They both learned to code. Yosef dropped out of Rutgers, I believe, and Ari got a degree in a different form of engineering. It was not coding. And and they both went. They both went. There was a free programming school in San Francisco, and the way that the system works is that you stay there for I forgot what the it's either I think maybe 10 or 15 days at first, and then you take a test, and the top percentage, or if you still want to stay, then you move on to the next class, and then I believe you could stay up to a year or maybe even longer. But the environment that you're in is extremely intensive, and you learn a lot, and it's 7 days a week, and you don't stop. And and even though you're not going to like a formally accredited school, and even though you're quote unquote dropping out, it's still requiring an enormous amount of work for you to put it. It's still requiring an enormous amount of effort, enormous amount of concentration, an enormous amount of discipline. And I actually feel that way at this point in my life about this podcast, right? Where it's all, we're almost a year in. We're about 10 months in, and and initial enthusiasm, motivation, comes and goes, and and then at this point, the only thing that's going to separate me from becoming successful at this is being willing to put in the time. That's actually one of the benefits that I've felt recently, that I've just that I'm gaining from avoiding cannabis, is I have more time at night. I've been going to bed recently. I usually go to bed around 10:30, maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock. I've been going to bed closer to 12:30, 1 o'clock, with the same amount of getting up with the same amount of energy every day. But those extra 2 hours, 3 hours that I get at night to spend researching people and reaching out to companies, to individuals, and reaching out to people that have never heard of me before, that I've never heard of, or thinking, what kind of guest do I want to get on? Do I want to get a psychiatrist? Do I want to get a businessman? Do I want to get an athlete? Who am I interested in talking to, and how do I go about finding them? If in a year or two or 5 or 10, I ultimately become successful, it's not going to be because I dropped out and didn't want to, oh, well, I'm not going to make my way in the system, and I'll just find my own way. It took, it's the equivalent. I mean, I probably put in as many hours, almost as many hours in a week into the podcast as I put into my job and into teaching. And that's actually why I find myself spread so thin, because I mean, how how can you do a sales job that's primarily commission based full time, and teach and prepare classes and grade papers and be a present teacher and build up a podcast and a business from the ground? And the only way you can't succeed at all of them unless you're willing to work extremely, extremely hard, and really sacrifice a lot of the comforts, and then and trust the fact that, because I'm doing what I love, and because I'm doing a combination of what I love, and the responsible things in life that provide other things that I love. For example, my job, which I don't love, gives me the space to have a house that I love, and it gives me a space to support my family, and which I love more than anything. And so I'm really putting, so all this stuff, so I'm counting on the fact that going forward, I'll be able to look back and connect the dots in a way that's really, really beautiful. And I have so much faith in that process that I don't remember the last time that I've sat back and been like, I don't think I can make it. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. I think to myself very often, I think, oh, I'm so tired. But that's always followed by, I'm so tired because I can't wait to keep on going. I'm just going to keep on pushing, and I keep on going, and that's something that's really that I think is really, really significant, and something really important is that. just because you're going on a path less taken doesn't mean that it's gonna be less work or less effort. But and then to have faith in, and this is kind of where, you know, whatever kind of philosophy or perspective you're going to have, faith in God, faith in universe, faith in karma, faith in just, hard work pays off, that you'll be able to look back at any point in your life and say, oh, that makes sense. And I mean, just, on a personal level, I started to work with my dad, and I thought I was the biggest loser in the entire world, and this is actually one of the things I was telling my students. I was like, the worst one, I think one of the most embarrassing things for me about starting to work with my dad was not the fact that I was working with my dad, was the fact that it's a job that I essentially didn't necessarily need, like it didn't require any kind of real um skill or knowledge on my part, because what kind of dad is not going to take care of their kid? And so I could have, it didn't matter what my degree was. It didn't matter how I did in school. It didn't matter whether or not I went to college. The only thing that mattered was that my dad was willing to hire me. And so it wasn't based on my own merit. And to be supported based on something that's not on your own merit is a very, at least for me, was a very embarrassing and shameful thing. And for the first year, I was really, 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 first, not a year, first couple of years, first 2 3 years, it was really, really challenging for me, because I really felt like I was dead weight. I felt like my dad was swimming, and I was just hanging out on his back while he's trying to keep his head above water, and I'm just weighing him down, and I wasn't bringing enough to the table. And then at one point, after working with him for I think 2.5 or 3 years, I started making sales, and I started become comfortable on the phone with customers, and I started figuring out a system that worked for my that worked, I found the flaws in, the way that the current business was running, and I wanted to figure out ways that I could fill those voids with my own way, with my own skills that other people at the company did not have. And looking back now, of course, the dots connect. Looking back now, not only do the dots connect, but it was the biggest blessing I've ever had. I have an opportunity to work from home. I have an ability to help support my immediate family, and as in my parents and siblings, my younger siblings, as well as my own family. And and then looking back now, at this point where I am in my life, it's not just that I'm dead weight, but I'm actually helping him swim too, and I'm helping my whole family swim. And I never ever would have dreamed that that was going to be the case. I never ever would have thought that. And being at home, working from home and working in the business allows me to build this, which would hopefully allow me to continue supporting my whole family, and my parents and my siblings and my wife and kids, and anyone else. So just that, just the faith in the hard work, and the faith in that. And you can't push and the other thing is, I think everyone only has a certain amount of tolerance for things that they don't like, and to pursue things that they love. And I've talked about that too much. I'm not going to talk about that any more than just say that. But so that was the first part of the speech. And the second part was about bad things happening. And when you lose, you only really lose if you quit. And then he was talking, and Steve Jobs was talking about the fact that he got thrown out of Apple, of course, which is infamous tale and infamous story. And then how he built Next after, and then he built a little company called Pixar. And there's actually an incredible book that I'd recommend. I'll put the link in the show note captions, called "To Pixar and Beyond," which is about written by the CFO of Pixar. His name is Lawrence Levy, and he helped take the company public, and he worked side by side with Steve Jobs for for I think 5 years. Um, and and it's basically his experience working with him. Pixar. I'm just writing this down, so I'll put this in the show note caption so I remember. Pixar Beyond, Steve Jobs speech, growing up. Awesome. Just all the things that would be recapping on later, and and he said that, when you got thrown out of Apple, I can't, and Steve Jobs, as collected as he was for the Stanford graduation. Um, as collected and cool as he was, and as much wisdom and discipline as he had at the time, he and as much wisdom as he had at the time, was not an easy experience for him. He was far from cool. He was known to be explosive. He was known to fly off the handle. When he got fired, I'm sure he didn't take it in a very zen way. But of course, that's why we have that's why we respect and love and listen to people that have already been through the journey of life, because when they go through something and then they realize that there was a better way they could have dealt with it, they try to help us avoid that same issue that they had, and the same response that they have, and they say, "Listen, I did this. It was a mistake. Let's be healthier about this. Let's be better about this than you were before." And that feeling of failing upwards, not even failing upwards, that's because that has a negative connotation to it. But the feeling of that failing at something does not mean that it has to be that you are a failure, or that your life is over, that anything is over. As long as you have breath in you, you have not failed yet. And as long as you have life in you, you have not failed yet. And just because something didn't work out necessarily the way that you were expecting for it to, doesn't necessarily mean that you failed either. And to take failure and to use it as an opportunity and say, this is just, and this is actually, I talked to my wife about this just in terms of our relationship and in terms of the experiences that we have. I have to repeat this pretty often, because I said this while we were dating, and we're married for at least we're together for almost 4 years now. We're married for about 3.5 years now. And one of the things that I told her was that life is going to be like, when we get in a fight, people get caught up in fights. Oh my God, I can't stand him. What's he gonna, how am I gonna live like this my whole life? And Ephraim's so annoying. He's trying to podcast all the time. He's the worst. And everything is all about policy, and everything's all about music and hippies and blah 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 and teaching and whatever it is. I'm just being self degrading for comedic purposes. But I said, when we get into a fight, just remember that this is just a short sentence or a chapter or a paragraph in a whole book that's going to be our lives together. And failure, and we should look at failures in our lives the same way. That if you fail at something, that doesn't mean that the story of your life is a failure. It doesn't mean that the book that you write is that the book of your story of your life ends right now. This is just a paragraph, or just a sentence, or just a short chapter, or a couple of chapters in a whole story of your life. And so if you fail at one thing, and if you do not succeed at one thing, there's still a lot more to write. There's still a lot more to do. There's still a whole book left, and you have to make your way through. You can't put down the book. I mean, imagine you're reading Harry Potter as a kid, and then you stop after the fourth book when Voldemort comes back and they don't stop him, and you're like, oh man, well, sucks. Series is over, and Harry lost. Like, no, there's still two more books you have to read. You didn't get you didn't finish all the context, and so a lot of times we live a little bit too zoned in, or our lens is a little bit too zoomed in to really see the fact that there's a lot more to a story and to the story of our lives than just the initial failure that we're going through in the moment. And to have faith in that process, and to keep on putting in the work and keep on putting in the effort, and we will ultimately make our way through. And then finally, the last thing that he talked about was the notion of death. And death is the thing that gives life meaning. And not only that, and I love the way that he put it. He said that death clears out the old and makes way for the new. He's like, death is death is, imagine if you have, a forest, there's all dead trees all around. And you can't make your way through, and so it just clears everything out. It just clears everything away, and then it leaves space for new trees to grow, and it leaves space for more life to exist and to gather together. And he says, death is what gives life meaning, but it also provides us with perspective. And I thought that was really, obviously, aside from true, I thought that, we kind of have to live like that. And, and the example that you said was like, you look yourself in the mirror and you say, if today was my last day on earth, would I live it this way? And if the answer is no, too many days in a row, you really have to reassess something. And I think that's really powerful. And the problem is that these are all tend to be, it's not a problem. The reason why it's important to hear this often, because even though we know these ideas, none of these ideas are particularly complicated. None of these ideas are revolutionary, groundbreaking ideas that no one's ever thought of before, but they're some of the hardest ideas to keep ourselves aware of because we are always focused on what needs to be in front of us right now. Listen, as nice of an idea as it is that that you shouldn't mind failure, I have a mortgage to pay. And as much of a nice idea it is that you shouldn't spend your life, as if it's your last day. And, what are you going to, is this the way you want to live your last day? As much as that's a nice perspective, I have kids I need to eat, so so it's more about having a balance between those perspectives and just making sure that we keep them in mind often enough. And I think that in order to survive, we keep ourselves so, you have to be zoned in. We have to be focused on what's right in front of us. There are things that require our immediate attention, but there's 24 hours in a day, even though it doesn't feel like it sometimes. And and sometimes the 24 hours go by faster, and sometimes they go by slower. And sometimes it feels like they're never going to pass, and sometimes they feel like you just blink and they're all over. But there's 24 hours in a day, and a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds of that day should be devoted to some bigger picture ideas. And and I think that, you know, when you're in 12th grade, or when you're in college, or when you're about to graduate, or leaving med school, or you're about to start a new job, you kind of feel like the whole world's in front of you, and you're about to start something new. And so it's easy to kind of have that perspective because there's nothing that you're really zoning into right now. But um, but then once we get into a routine, once we spend 2 years at the same job, once we spend 3 years at high school, high school juniors don't really think about what it's going to be like when they're going to graduate, you know, and only as graduation kind of slips up on you and sneaks up on you, you turn around and say, "Whoa, like what just happened? Where'd the last 4 years go?" And that's something that I think is just a human condition thing. I think that's just a youth thing. Um, but but then as you get older, you kind of just take we kind of start taking these routines for granted, and we get everything becomes so reflexive and so mindless that we stop really thinking about some of these big picture questions. And um, these brushes with death, or these brushes with something scary, these scary experiences, you know, they they might wake us up for a little while, and then our tendency is to kind of go back to sleep and go back to the routine. And we need to keep on reminding ourselves of these moments. So hopefully this episode is doing just that for whoever's listening. And hopefully it's a wake-up call to just say, wait a minute, like, you know, number one, am I, you know, do I have faith in the fact that I'm putting in the most work that I could do, and that the dots will line up for me, and then when I look back in a year or a week or 6 months, I'll be able to point out, oh, that's exactly how that was supposed to happen, and I totally understand. Trust, I now understand that experience. Now I understand that I had to go through what I went through to be where I am, and I couldn't be otherwise. And then you have the experience of, living every day as though it's your last, and then not getting caught up. Don't live every day as if it's your last, but be aware every day that life is not infinite, and that life is finite, and that you're going to get older before you realize it. You're going to blink, and you're going to go from 21 to 29, and you're not going to be able to notice the difference of yourself in pictures. I thought the weirdest thing about getting older is that I'm at a point where, if you, from 11th grade to when, to my gap year in Israel, if I looked at two pictures of myself 2 years apart, I'd be like, oh, I know exactly when that was. But for the last decade of my life, pretty much, if I maybe not decade, maybe 5 years, I'm exaggerating. But if you show me a picture from 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and a picture of me today, I'd be like, I don't really know when that was. I mean, can you tell me where I was? And maybe that'll provide some context. But like, that like as we physically stop changing, I think that also is an indication as to how easy it is for us to stop really thinking about the fact that we really need to be awake for our lives, and that we need to do something to be able to tell the difference between day to day. So I hope all this was coherent. I hope all this made a lot of sense. I hope this was a lot of fun. And again, I'm sorry about just the two solo episodes this week. I hope to have more coming up. I definitely will have more coming up. And I have a lot of fun guests coming up. We are going to have a great time with this podcast, and we are going to keep on building and growing and getting better and better. So until then, I will see you guys soon. Please, also, I'm going to start saying this, just like or subscribe or rate 5 stars. Because in order to build, that's going to be one of the only ways for me to really grow is positive feedback and positive reinforcement. The algorithm needs it. So love you, and so long for now.